The numbers are in. Zero growth in July, inflation stuck at 3.8%, and the highest August borrowing in 5 years. Feeling confident about the budget? Hi, I'm Alefa, Chartered Financial Advisor here in the UK, and today we're looking forward to the budget, which is just weeks away. If you've seen the headlines, you'd think the budget is going to tax your home, your pension and your dog. But let's separate rumour from reality and prep calmly. Let's start by explaining the backdrop on which Rachel Reeves's budget falls. Growth has stalled, inflation is still above target, and government borrowing is running hotter than anyone would like. That mix squeezes the Chancellor's room to manoeuvre. It also explains why the rumour mill is full of revenue-raising ideas. Under the bonnet, there's a bigger story. Productivity is the engine of long-term prosperity and tax receipts. When that engine misfires, the public finances feel it. Even small downgrades to the productivity outlook can open up a sizable gap between where the fiscal rules say we should be and where we actually land. That gap is what commentators call the fiscal hole. The UK has had weak productivity growth since the financial crisis, roughly 0.5% a year compared with 2% a year before 2008. For years, the Office of Budget Responsibility, or OBR, has assumed that things will bounce back, forecasting productivity growth of around 1.1% a year. But recently, reports suggest the OBR is preparing to downgrade those forecasts to closer to the Bank of England's, which are much lower. And here's why that matters. Every 0.1% drop in forecast productivity growth wipes out around $9 billion in expected tax revenue over the forecast period. That means a bigger so-called fiscal hole. And to fill it, the Chancellor has two choices: cut spending or raise taxes. And given the politics, most people think more taxes are coming. So media hysteria is at its usual pre-budget high. Let's have a look at some of the most talked about potential tax changes. The VAT base and threshold changes, specifically whether the Chancellor might widen the VAT base, trim back reduced rates, or even lower the registration threshold. So right now, businesses don't have to register until their turnover hits £90,000. That threshold is one of the most generous in Europe. On one hand, it helps those smaller firms stay out of the VAT system. On the other hand, it creates a glass ceiling effect. Lots of small service businesses deliberately hold back growth so they don't tip over the line. And there's real world evidence of this. If the threshold were cut, more small firms would be pulled into VAT. That means extra admin, potentially higher prices for customers. But it creates a level playing field for all businesses regardless of their size. For those already registered, a broader base or fewer reduced rates could mean charging 20% VAT on more of what they sell. Will this happen? It's hard to say. Every Chancellor toys with the idea because it raises big money quickly. But politically, hitting micro businesses just before Christmas, let's call that tricky. So worth keeping an eye on, but not one to panic about until we see the red box open. Now let's talk property. Every budget seems to have whispers about stamp duty, council tax, or new levies on high-value homes. The latest rumours include replacing stamp duty with something more gradual, reforming council tax bans, or even targeting very expensive property sales with extra charges. Why does this come up so often? Because property is visible, valuable, and relatively hard to move offshore. Politicians know it plays well with headlines about fairness, but there's a catch. Big property taxes can freeze the housing market, making downsizing less attractive and trapping people in homes that don't suit them. I actually think stamp duty is one of the clumsiest taxes we've got. It discourages people from moving, traps older homeowners in houses that no longer fit their needs, and makes it harder for younger families to get on the ladder. It's a tax on transactions, not on wealth, which is why the housing market feels so sticky. One idea that keeps coming back and frankly has merit is moving towards a land value tax, where you tax the underlying site rather than the act of buying or selling. Done well, that could encourage better use of land, reduce distortions in the housing market, and spread the tax burden more fairly. Of course, any big shift like that would take years to implement, and politicians rarely have the patience. But I will say this, tinkering with stamp duty rates at the margins isn't going to solve our housing problems. If the Chancellor really wanted a bold pro-growth reform, replacing stamp duty with a smarter land-based tax would be a great place to start. Now, a favourite of every Chancellor is what we call stealth taxes. These aren't headline grabbers. Instead, they quietly squeeze more out of you without changing the headline rate. The classic example is fiscal drag. Income tax thresholds are frozen while wages creep up. That means more of your income is pulled into higher tax bands, even though the basic rates haven't changed. On paper, the Chancellor can say we didn't raise taxes. In practice, you pay more. So if you're feeling like your payslip is lighter, even though rates look the same, you're not imagining it. That's fiscal drag at work, and it's one of the most effective tools in the Treasury's kit. I wouldn't expect to see any allowances or thresholds increase in line with inflation during this budget. Inheritance tax, the most hated tax in Britain, even though only a small slice of estates actually pay it. Every budget brings rumours of tinkering. This time, the chatter is around tightening the 7-year gifting rule or putting lifetime limits on how much you can give away tax-free. Why? Because receipts from IHT have been rising sharply. More families are being dragged in as house prices climb and allowances stay frozen. It's politically tempting revenue, even if the system is already a maze. Now, for families near or above the thresholds, the message is simple. Don't assume the rules will stay as generous as they are today. Sensible estate planning isn't about panic gifting. It's about understanding the reliefs and exemptions that exist now and being ready to adapt if the Chancellor changes the goalposts. Would a big IHT overhaul happen overnight? Unlikely, but small tweaks that pull more families into scope, very possible. ISAs don't usually grab headlines, but this year they've been in the rumour mill. Why? Because savers have piled record amounts into cash ISAs, while interest rates are high, and that's costing the Treasury more in lost tax than expected. So the speculation is whether the Chancellor might trim back the cash ISA allowance, cap how much you can hold, or even steer more of that money into UK investments instead. Some commentators see this as a way to nudge savers into more productive assets rather than just sitting in cash. Now, will it happen? Again, hard to say. ISAs are popular across the board and tampering with them risks political blowback. For cautious savers with large cash balances, the key point is don't assume the ISA system will always look as generous as it does today. Another rumour that's been doing the rounds is dividend tax. The idea? Bringing dividend tax rates closer in line with income tax rates. And why? Because it's seen as politically easier to justify. Most dividend income is concentrated among business owners and investors, not the average voter. Right now, basic rate taxpayers pay 8.7% on dividends. Higher rate taxpayers pay 33.75% on dividends, and additional rate taxpayers pay 39.35% on dividends. Now compare that with income tax rates of 20, 40 and 45%, and you can see the gap. Closing the gap, even partially, would raise billions. Who would feel it the most? Owner-managers taking income from their company's dividends, and investors with significant portfolios outside of ISAs or pensions. For them, any rise could mean thousands of pounds more in tax each year. Of course, nothing is confirmed yet, but alongside the chatter on capital gains tax, dividend reform is one of the low-hanging fruit ideas that commentators think could be on the table. Pensions are another area that's never far from the rumour mill. The big talking point this time? Tax relief. At the moment, you get relief at your marginal rate. So a higher rate taxpayer gets 40% relief on contributions, additional rate 45%, and basic rate 20%. That makes pensions a powerful planning tool, but it also means the Treasury spends more supporting those on higher incomes. The idea being floated is to scrap that system and replace it with a flat rate of, say, 20% for everyone. That would feel fairer politically, but for higher earners, it would mean a significant cut in incentive to save. There's also some chatter about reducing the 25% tax-free cash lump sum, another politically sensitive but revenue-raising option. Papers like This Is Money have covered it recently, and it stirs a lot of anxiety. Now here's the problem. During the last budget cycle, many savers were scared into thinking they would lose their lump sum overnight. Some panicked, took out their money, only to discover that nothing changed. And worse off, once that money's out, you can't put it back into your pension. For those people, that one decision had permanent tax consequences. Could rules change in the future? Of course. But here's what's important. It's highly unlikely that the Chancellor will announce changes to the tax-free lump sum that take effect immediately on budget day. Any serious reforms would almost certainly come with consultation, transitional rules, or a future implementation date. So the sensible approach to this is don't let scary headlines push you into an irreversible decision. If changes are announced, you'll have time to make a calm, calculated plan for how and when you access your pension savings. Panic is never a good retirement strategy. That said, if you are a higher or additional rate taxpayer making big pension contributions, it's worth being aware that these reliefs may not be as generous forever. And finally, the most talked about potential tax change, capital gains tax. Capital gains tax is always near the top of the rumour list, and this year is no different. The big speculation is whether the Chancellor might align CGT rates more closely with income tax, or tighten up some of the existing reliefs. There's even talk about taxing gains on very high value homes, or restricting the main residence exemption for so-called mansion properties. Who would this matter to? Well, business owners looking to sell, landlords selling buy-to-lets, and higher rate investors crystallising gains on shares or funds. Now, a quick word of caution. We saw during previous budgets that the mere rumour of a CGT hike caused people to rush into selling businesses or properties, sometimes at the wrong time. The Chancellor didn't actually make the change, and those people were left wondering if they jumped too soon. This time round, it does seem much more likely that there will be some sort of capital gains tax reform. And why? 3 reasons. First, the political climate. The government needs to raise revenue, and with borrowing high and productivity forecasts being cut, the pressure is on to find money somewhere. Second, optics. CGT is widely seen as a rich person's tax. It's paid disproportionately by business owners selling up, landlords cashing in, and investors with sizable portfolios. That makes it politically easier to justify compared with raising basic rate income tax, VAT, which hit everyone. That makes it politically easier to justify compared with raising basic rate income tax or VAT, which hit everyone. And third, public appetite. Polling consistently shows that taxing wealth and gains has much more support than raising taxes on wages. So from a messaging standpoint, it's an easy sell. But, and it's a big but, there's a risk. If you hike CGT too far towards income tax levels, you could discourage investment, reduce transactions, and actually shrink the tax take. That's happened before. When rates go up, people hold off selling. The danger is you end up with a policy that sounds fair, but raises less money than forecast, and potentially stifles growth at the same time. So yes, CGT reform looks more likely this year than in recent budgets, but whether it's a smart policy or just good politics is another question entirely. So that's the landscape. A lot of rumours, a lot of noise, and a fair dose of political theatre. We've covered the big areas: pensions, ISAs, dividends, inheritance, property, and capital gains. Some of these changes feel more likely than others, but until the red box opens, none of it is certain. Here's my final thoughts. Don't let headlines drive your financial decisions. Acting in panic can lead to mistakes that you can't undo. We saw that last time with pensions, and it cost some people dearly. Sensible planning means waiting for the facts, weighing up your options, and then acting in a way that supports your long-term goals. As ever, thank you for watching to the end. If you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button to support our growing channel, and I will see you on the next one.